Hey friends, welcome to the show. It's Alexis. And today I've got a topic for you that encompasses federalism, elections, and the Constitution, and who actually has the power. So, this is really relevant in what's going on in our world today, what's happening locally, and what we're seeing on our phones. And it feels hard to believe, but I'm about to have, and when I say it feels hard to believe, it's hard to believe for me because I'm about to have three kids that are able to vote. And it kind of like blows my mind. I was hanging out with my senior last night and we were joking around about how, like, do mom and dad seem old to you? And it was really funny because he just said, well, you are over 40. And my husband and I were just laughing about it. I mean, we were all laughing about it. But as I was thinking about like what that meant and well, what that means for us and with the kids and how he is going to turn 18 this year and he'll be able to vote in the, big November elections, I was thinking about how, like, what that's meant for me as a parent to have my kids vote, what that meant for me when I turned 18, the start of my senior year, and what I was able to vote, and, how I was able to vote. And so that's something that I think even kids today, maybe sometimes adults, this is sometimes these things that just we get to participate in all the time where we are it just like, we get in a car and we go to the store or we can go for a run and, we stoplights work. Some of these things that happen, dare I use the phrase, we just kind of like take them for granted. Like they're there, we happen, we get, they happen, we get to do them. It just seems like a part of life. And I think some of the reflections that I have are that no, like we have this system because we as the people sustain the system. And it's important for us to understand how the system works so that we can ensure that the system works for the, in the best interest of the most people. So today, talking about federalism, elections, and the Constitution, and I want to start with something that might surprise a lot of adults. Most people have never actually been taught how the Constitution is actually structured or even remember any of those parts if and when they learned about it in high school. And there might be some people who learned about it in college, but dare I say, if I were to ask you what part of the Constitution talks about congressional power, I mean, I think, I even at a point in my life would have just like thrown a dart at what number that would have been. So, and when we don't know that structure, modern political debates can feel confusing, emotional, and disconnected from reality. So today, we're going to go through three things as succinctly and just kind of as quickly as possible, trying not to bore you, and walk through one, the basic outline of the Constitution, how federalism and elections fit into that. And then I'm going to insert two books into the conversation. One is called The Divided States of America by Donald Kettle, and the other one is called American Government by Yuval Levin. And each one of these authors actually has a different perspective when it comes to federalism. So I think it's kind of interesting. So just talking about the Constitution and just some of the basics. So in terms of the Constitution, this is the foundation. This is 1787, and this is the main rule book for how the U.S. government works. And it answers who has the power, what can they do, and what can they not do. And so I'm going to separate this out just kind of into some simple architecture. So when we are talking about the Constitution, the first three articles, those are the branches of government. Article 1 is Congress. Those are our lawmakers. They make the laws. They control spending. They declare war. And those are the two parts, House of Representatives and the Senate. House of Representatives are based on how many people are within the population of the state. That's how many representatives a state gets. And the Senate is equal. Every state gets 2 representatives. So the big idea is that Congress writes the rules. Article 2 is the president. This is the executive branch. The president enforces the laws. The president is known as the commander-in-chief, and the president appoints officials. And this executive branch includes the president, the vice president, and the cabinet. And the big idea is that the president carries out the rules. Article 3 are the courts. This is the judicial branch, and they interpret the laws and resolve disputes. Now, this includes the Supreme Court. It includes federal courts. And the big idea here is that courts explain what the rules mean and settle those disputes. So, why 3 branches of government? Basic. So no one person or group gets too much power. This is what we call the separation of power and checks and balances. I know that you guys all know this. So moving into some of the articles that you may not be as familiar with. Articles 4 through 7, this is how the system holds together. So Article 4 talks about the states and how they relate to one another and work together. Article 5 is how the Constitution can be amended, very hard on purpose. Article 6 is the federal law is supreme when constitutional, and the federal law beats state law when they conflict. An example of this would be the abortion law on the federal level and how the Supreme Court had one ruling decades ago, and then just recently overturned that ruling. And so then there was no federal law. It reverts back to the states. Now this is why states have different rulings on abortion. And this is for many, that is applicable in all settings. And getting into the implications of that later into the conversation. So Article 7 is about ratification and how the Constitution became official. Now, this is where federalism lives. So it's talking about shared power and divided authority. Okay, now we've reached the Bill of Rights section and kind of this federalism line. What's really interesting when I'm realizing that I should share this, that sometimes when I talk to people and use the word federalism, it's a little bit confusing because there's this automatic thought that it is the concept of federalism, the word itself means more federal government. And that is not what it means. Federalism in this sense, when we're talking about public administration and public policy, it is the tension in the system between the federal government and the states, and the states' power and authority in various settings and their tension with the federal government. So, moving into the Bill of Rights, these are the first 10 amendments, and these were added right after the Constitution to protect people from government overreach because people feared centralized power. And these were originally applied to the people in the 13 colonies, hence the 13 stripes in the state flag, in the U.S. flag, and then shifted over to the 50 states, which we all know that was a process, but hence the 50 stars and the U.S. flag. So the simplest, middle school version of this, which I think even adults appreciate, is that the simplest list is, the first one gives us our freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. The second one is the right to bear arms. The third one is no forced housing of soldiers. The fourth is the protection from unreasonable searches. Number 5 is the rights of accused people, like fair trials, no self-incrimination. Number 6 is the right to a speedy public trial. 7 is the right to a jury in civil cases. 8 is no cruel or unusual punishment. 9 is people have more rights than just the ones listed. And 10, powers not given to the federal government belong to the states or the people. Now, this is what's interesting. I heard this guy on social media kind of break down the Constitution, and from his perspective, like the Bill of Rights and like his take on all the moving parts was that essentially uh number 10 is so important because it reinforces everything above it and reinforces that federalism line between the federal government and the states. And, basically saying that if the power is not explicitly given to the federal government, that belongs to the states. And it was his interpretation that what we have seen over the decades is the federal government trying to reach for different powers. And I think my brain goes to places of, listen, when one political party is in power, they love it when their party reaches for more federal power, but the other party doesn't, and vice versa. So this is why I have a friend in a state legislature outside of Idaho, and he was telling me about how Utah just had a federalism conference last year for the first time. And I think he said like 13 or 14 states attended. I know Idaho attended. I don't know who attended from Idaho, but I do know that the Idaho legislature has a federalism committee. And what was interesting in talking with him, and he and I were kind of talking a little bit about federalism, but some people believe that what we are experiencing right now with the government and different issues that are popping up is that we are experiencing a structural problem, meaning it's a federalism problem, and that the federal government is overreaching into states' authorities. Now, this is a perspective coming from a Republican state. And I just think that's really interesting that a lot of Republicans are saying, yo, we have a federalism problem, and the administration that is currently in right now is overreaching their power and trying to grab at other powers. Again, not new, but something that's happening right now. And kind of, I think for many people, it feels very frenzied, very chaotic, really frustrating. And in some levels, some of the basic things that are being reached for seem like such basic states' rights. So it's causing a lot of frustration. So here's the key federalism moment when it comes to the 10th Amendment. And I kind of mentioned this, but I want to get back to, not going on this, come back from my side tangent. The 10th Amendment, any power not given to the federal government belongs to the states or the people. And that includes election administration, unless explicitly stated otherwise. This is the federalism line, the constitutional boundary. Now, talking about elections specifically, because that's kind of in the headlines right now, some really prominent, really things have been happening on the federal level, and just understanding a little bit about elections. So want to be concrete here. Article 1, Section 4 is the Elections Clause. This is the main place the Constitution actually talks about how elections are run. And it says states decide the times, place, and manner of holding elections for members of the U.S. House and Senate, but Congress can make or change rules about those by passing a law. In its simplest version, this means that state governments are in charge of most details of how elections happen, like where voters go and how ballots are counted. So states control the time, place, and manner of elections. That's very important. Congress, not the president, not the Supreme Court. Congress, they're the lawmakers. They make the rules. And then we're talking about Congress and the federal government can set the rules that states have to follow, but only about federal elections, like how congressional elections work. And Congress, so getting into this, I'm going to give you an example of what this means, so kind of understanding the difference. Knowing that this clause does not lay out specific voting rights, it just tells who gets to decide the rules. So The Constitution did not originally guarantee a right to vote. We know this. When the original Constitution was written and ratified, it did not guarantee people the right to vote, and it left that up to the individual states. So early on, different states had different rules. We know this. Like some only let white landowners vote. Others had looser rules. So these are where the federal amendments come in. And the federal amendments that do affect voting rights. So this is what we're talking about when the federal government can impact that. They're the ones that they can set rules that the states have to follow. These would be examples of rules that the states have to follow. So over time, the Constitution was amended, so it was changed to protect voting rights nationally, meaning that both states and the federal government must respect these rules. These rules are the 15th Amendment. No one can be denied the right to vote because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 19th Amendment, women cannot be denied the right to vote because of sex. The 24th Amendment, those are poll taxes, paying money to vote, are banned in federal elections. You guys, that was only just in 1964. And the 26th Amendment, that was 1971, citizens 18 years and older must be allowed to vote. So these don't tell states how to organize elections. They tell states and the federal government who must be allowed to vote, no matter what. Now, Article 2 in the Constitution talks about presidential elections. So state legislatures decide how electors are chosen. And what all of this means is that states run elections, Congress sets guardrails, and the president has no role. So again, like I sound like a broken record, but I am simply using all of the foundational components of our system and sharing what this means for our system. So putting all these things together, the question, when we're talking about what questions about our system, who runs elections? The states, because they're setting voting procedures, where the polls are, how ballots are counted, etc. Who sets the rules? Well, Congress can override or add rules for federal elections like deadlines and protections, like all those amendments of, you can't be denied because of the color of your skin or your sex or your religion or anything, those types of protections. And in terms of who set the rules, the president has no constitutional power to run elections or unilaterally change election rules. He has no authority to do that. So, and who protects voting rights? The Constitution does through the amendments. All those amendments I listed, they protect this. This is not ambiguous. Nothing about this is ambiguous. It's a design choice and how our Constitution was designed. So, kind of moving into this tension within the federal, within our system and within federalism. This is where these two books come in that I wanted to tie into the conversation. So the first book is by a scholar, Donald Kettle, and he wrote the book, The Divided States of America. Just came out like 5 years ago. I think it was like 2020 or 2022. And he argues that the current system of federalism is fueling extreme inequality between states to the point of being fundamentally unstable. So his argument here is that this system that we've set up is fundamentally unstable because he argues that modern federalism struggles because national problems require coordination, responsibility is fragmented, and accountability is unclear. And so elections from his perspective are a good example in that technically we have 50 systems. There are different rules and there is uneven trust among the states. So from this view, A call for national standards or even centralization comes from a desire for clarity and functionality, but not necessarily control. This book was written before the conversations that are happening today or the actions that we're seeing regarding the current presidential administration towards elections and interfering with states. This book was not written for that, but this argument lays in there that there is a call for federal standards for clarity and functionality, but they're not making this call because of control or wanting to centralize for that reason. They're calling for clarity and functionality. So the opposite of this is the argument that federalism still matters and it works. And this is the book American Covenant by Yuval Levin. And he offers a different perspective in that he is arguing that the constitutional structure, including its tensions, is a feature, not a bug, designed to manage conflict rather than eliminate it. So he's arguing that the Constitution succeeds, its structure succeeds, the federalism succeeds because it disperses power, because it forces compromise, and because it lowers the stakes of national conflict. So he believes federalism keeps democracy closer to the people and that it prevents single points of failure and that it contains mistakes. And from this perspective, centralizing elections could increase distrust, not reduce it. And it could do a lot of other things. So applying this premise to what we're seeing today, and really why this matters, there has been public reporting about federal investigations related to election interference, including actions taken by the FBI in Georgia connected to election-related matters. If you haven't seen it, I recommend going and looking up these articles. You don't have to believe me, go look it up yourself. Now, those investigations are, there's some perspective on about how this is enforcing existing a law, not running elections. This is where conflict is coming in. This is where people are trying to make distinctions and justify behaviors. So it's super interesting. And then separately from this FBI in Georgia incident, there have been statements attributed to President Trump and some of his, some secondhand statements, some comments that were made on a podcast, about calling for more centralized or national control of elections. And so here's, again, Alexis Morgan's, perspective on the constitutional reality. Even if a president wants a centralized election, and even if supporters believe it has benefits, the Constitution does not give the president that authority. President doesn't have the authority to do that. So, and again, this is not about personality, it's about structure. So the real question about federalism and, enforcement and efficiency and action and stuff is the Constitution does not promise efficiency. And this is something that I know you've heard me mention. And when we're talking about different laws and things that are happening and how we interact with the government, a lot of questions that get asked are, or the things that we want to say is like, we want to be efficient, or, does efficiency lead to effectiveness and all those different things, or vice versa. So the Constitution does not promise efficiency. That's, when you're working among three branches in the states, it's a slower process, got to work through conflict. But the Constitution does promise limits. And federalism forces each of us to ask, who should hold power? How close should that power be to the people? And what risks are we willing to accept to avoid, centralization, all sorts of things. So that tension is not a flaw. It's the system doing what it is designed to do. And I think this is why, for me, this is why federalism, it does not end arguments, but it does contain them, because it helps us refer back to, if we understand what the structure of the system is. And for this conversation today and what I see around, Elections sit at the center of that design, not because they're easy, but because they are foundational. Elections are baked in and into the Constitution, and understanding what that means and the conversation around that in the system is important. Understanding the Constitution does not tell us what to think clearly. Even in Idaho, there are, two different groups coming at what specifically is written, the interpretation of what is written in the Constitution. But it does tell us what is possible, what is not, and why those limits exist. So, in understanding all of this and bringing it back to the very beginning, knowing our system matters because our system is what we live within. Knowing and understanding the Constitution matters. And again, I really appreciate you joining today, and I just want to leave you with that, like, policy is not abstract, it's personal, and federalism is a big part of that conversation, and it does impact us on the federal, state, local level, and at home and in our communities. Hope you have a great day.